her. A female colleague, jealous of Yujin's talent, framed her. She lied, saying the company had run out of sample fabric, forcing Yujin to rush out to buy some. When Jaemin found out, he angrily reprimanded her and warned that he wouldn't let it go easily. Yujin was busy searching for the right fabric for her design. She pleaded with the owner, but she wouldn't sell it to her. Only when the owner knew that Yujin was a friend of Bongsan did she make an exception and help Yujin once. Only a few hours remained until the deadline for submitting the product sample to her superiors for approval. Yujin had to work so hard to meet the deadline that she dozed off without realizing it. Bongsan returned home and saw this. He wanted to touch her lovely face, but she suddenly woke up. Afraid of being questioned, Bongsan quickly changed the subject. Afterwards, he and Yujin went for a walk and breathed in the fresh air. They talked about their future dreams. Yujin wished to create her own brand so that someone would recognize her. Bongsan, upon hearing this, fantasized that the person Yujin was referring to was him, so he chose that moment to express his feelings to her. Bongsan eagerly awaited Yujin's answer, but she naively thought that Bongsan was just joking with her. Recently, Yujin has been so focused on her work that she forgot her promise to design for Bongsan's shop. That's why Bongsan deliberately acted that way to remind Yujin. Just thinking about Yujin makes Bongsan incredibly angry. Suddenly, a customer arrives. This is the owner of a large, potentially lucrative bar. He wants designer items for his female employees, but Bongsan's shop doesn't have what he needs. The man is about to leave when Bongsan rushes out to stop him. Bongsan can't let this VIP customer slip away. Bongsan promises that he will bring high-quality goods for the customer to see the next day. Bongsan also assures the bar owner that he won't disappoint him. So, the next day, Bongsan dresses elegantly and goes to meet the bar owner. Bongsan shows his business card from Sophia to demonstrate his wealth and his ability to guarantee the quality of his goods. The bar owner went to make a phone call to verify if he was Junhei from Sophia. Meanwhile, the company was holding a meeting to select a design for their strategic product. Initially, everyone chose Seon's design, making her very happy. Yujin, however, was very disappointed that she wasn't chosen. Jaemin noticed Yujin's expression. He really wanted to choose Yujin's design because it was more creative, but doing so would make people think Jaemin was being biased. At the last minute, a famous designer saw the potential in Yujin's dress design and chose it for the campaign. This made Yujin extremely happy. However, a problem arose. Yesterday, Yujin showed the owner the sketched design from Bongsan's shop. Therefore, the shop owner thought it was a product Bongsan was about to launch, so she gave the design to Bongsan. Bongsan also thought it was a product designed for his shop, so he immediately took it to the factory to have it made. Bongsan also wanted to keep it a secret from Yujin to surprise her. Just as Bongsan left, another shop owner arrived. Seeing the design, she was very interested. At this time, Jisan brought a gift to congratulate Bongsan on the opening of his shop. The two of them joked around. Just then, Yujin saw them. She wondered why Bongsan was so close to this thug. Bongsan pulled Yujin aside to explain. At this point, only Jisan was left in the shop. Jisan accidentally found Junhee's business card in Bongsan's jacket pocket. Meanwhile, Yujin knew that the two of them had lived together in the same orphanage, but she still reminded Bongsan not to get too close to that kind of person. Furthermore, Yujin also wanted to let Bongsan know that her product had been selected. If the launch was successful tomorrow, Yujin would become a permanent employee. Bongsan also had a surprise for Yujin. Bongsan also told Yujin to come to his store tomorrow. The next day, as Bongsan was preparing to go to the store to launch the design, the butler unexpectedly appeared. Because today was also the company's new product launch day, Bongsan had to attend. However, Yujin was also there. If Yujin saw him, Bongsan would be exposed, so he didn't know how to handle it. Meanwhile, it was almost time for the show, but Yujin's model hadn't arrived yet. The team leader said they could temporarily find an amateur model to replace her, but Yujin was still uneasy. She would be the one to showcase her outfit. Just minutes before the performance, the company suddenly received bad news. Yujin's exclusive design was being sold everywhere online, causing widespread outrage. They questioned whether Yujin was copying or leaking the design. Yujin was the most shocked of all. She couldn't understand how such an absurd thing could happen, but it was too late. The strategic product had been replaced by Seon's design. Therefore, Yujin was no longer eligible to perform. Everyone left in disappointment, leaving only Yujin standing there dejected. Bongsan and the butler appeared at the company, looking like thieves. Bongsan was completely covered from head to toe to avoid being recognized, but when Bongsan entered the hall, he couldn't find Yujin anywhere. Bong-san also felt very strange. However, this reassured him, allowing him to pretend to be Jun-hee until the performance ended. Through Sun's words, Bong-san knew that Yoo-jin's design had been leaked. Bong-san seemed to understand something and hurried away. But at that moment, Yoo-jin found out who had copied her design and was selling it online. The other party blamed everything on Bong-san. Yoo-jin immediately went to Bong-san's shop and saw her mother displaying the dress. She couldn't believe she had been betrayed by Bong-san like this. Bong-san wanted to explain to Yoo-jin that it was all a misunderstanding, but Yoo-jin was no longer in the mood to listen. She slapped him and left. This time, it was all Bong-san's fault. If Yoo-jin didn't forgive him, he would blame himself for the rest of his life. The very next morning, Bong-san went to Yoo-jin's house. As soon as he saw Yoo-jin come out, he quickly knelt down and apologized to her. He explained that he had mistakenly thought it was the design she had created for her shop, but someone else posted it online. Yoo-jin didn't take Bong-san's apology seriously. She even asked why Bong-san was so easily swayed by others, and that it was because Bong-san lacked self-respect that he stole her design. Bong-san immediately stood up and said that he wasn't like she said. But things were irreparable now. Even if Bong-san didn't do it intentionally, Yoo-jin had to take responsibility to the company. After that, Yoo-jin was officially fired, and she no longer had a chance to rectify her mistake. Jae-min couldn't protect Yoo-jin either, as this was a company matter. Jae-min wanted to confirm if he had feelings for Yoo-jin, so he gently placed his hand on her shoulder and prepared to kiss her. At that moment, Bong-san arrived to ask Yoo-jin for forgiveness. If the other two became a couple, Bong-san would have no chance left. Bong-san hastily snatched the glasses from the sleeping man and rushed towards Jae-min. He quickly separated the two of them and hugged Jae-min tightly, turning his back to Yoo-jin so she wouldn't see his face. Then, Bong-san pretended to have a heart attack, causing everyone to panic. Jae-min quickly called an ambulance. On the way, Jae-min told the staff to quickly contact the hospital so they could prepare. Because Jun-hee had a heart condition and Bong-san feared being exposed, he disappeared before anyone noticed. Bong-san's priority now was to get Yoo-jin to forgive him. Bong-san had gathered all the dress samples that the other woman had copied. He wanted Yoo-jin to burn them herself so she could vent her anger. If Yoo-jin didn't have the courage, Bong-san could do it for her. Seeing Bong-san pouring gasoline on the pile of dresses, she burst into tears, begging him to stop. After all, these were Yoo-jin's cherished possessions, and she couldn't bear to see them destroyed. Afterward, they gave away all the dresses for free. As long as people happily accepted them, that was the greatest comfort for her. The matter with Yoo-jin seemed settled. However, Bong-san sneaking out of the hospital angered Jae-min. The butler had to drag Bong-san back and wait for Jae-min to reprimand him. Now, Bong-san had to find a plausible reason to avoid arousing Yoo-jin's suspicion. Bong-san said he had a very important appointment and had to leave immediately, but this reason didn't sound convincing. However, seeing that Bong-san's health was still stable, Jae-min didn't want to pursue the matter further. Jae-min only hoped that he and Yoo-jin could understand each other's feelings. This was the first time Jae-min had experienced the feeling of being deeply in love with someone and wanted to make amends. However, Yoo-jin felt their circumstances were too different. She didn't want people to think her success was due to Jae-min. After quitting her job at the company, Yoo-jin tried to switch to another field. But when she saw customers photographing her designs, her love for fashion resurfaced. Yoo-jin ultimately chose to return to the fashion industry and decided to become a designer for Bong-san's shop. The two supported each other a lot in their work and became increasingly close. Meanwhile, Seon secretly liked Bong-san. Seon invited Bong-san to her shop to sew clothes so she could have more opportunities to be close to him. Coincidentally, Mr. Choi visited the shop that day and talked about his charity work. Bong-san also wanted to help the children at the orphanage, so he and Seon took clothes from the company's warehouse and brought them to the orphanage as a donation. When the children heard that a donor had arrived, they all rushed out. Throughout the day, the children clung to Seon and Bong-san, making things quite difficult for them. But in return, they felt very happy for having done a good deed. Seon wanted to take this opportunity to express her feelings, but unfortunately, Bong-san couldn't reciprocate. Bong-san told Seon that he wasn't Jun-hee and that he didn't deserve her affection. The person Seon loved was the young heir of a leading Korean corporation, not him. At this time, news of Bong-san's charity work at the orphanage had made the news, and of course, reached the chairman. Everyone was tense, thinking she would be angry. However, the chairman happily praised her grandson for doing a good job, considering it compensation for the car accident he caused earlier. That day, Bong-san hadn't returned yet, but he received an order from a customer, so Yoo-jin took Bong-san's place to bring clothes to the bar. But the other party insisted that Yoo-jin try on the revealing dress before he would accept the goods. Not wanting to affect the business, Yoo-jin tried on the dress. Unexpectedly, someone mistook her for a prostitute and tried to grope her. Yujin panicked and pushed him away to run. Unfortunately, she ran into Jaemin right outside the bar. Seeing Yujin in that state, it was hard not to misunderstand. Jaemin immediately pulled Yujin into the car to avoid attracting attention. Once they were in a secluded place, he asked her what had happened. Yujin recounted the whole story to Jaemin, but no matter what, Jaemin still didn't want her to frequent places like that. Therefore, he offered to introduce her to another company, but she adamantly refused his help. Even Yujin never listened to Jaemin's opinions, even though they came from his sincere heart. So Jaemin told Yujin about his situation. Although outwardly, Jaemin was admired by many, he had always been under pressure from his father and grandmother since childhood. So, this was the only time Jaemin hoped Yujin could understand him. Later, his mother discovered that among the assets registered under Junhee's name was a shop called Little Master in Dongdaemun Market. She found it strange and told Jaemin to investigate. She wondered why a young master like Junhee would buy a shop in a common market. To verify, Jaemin went there himself to investigate. And before Jaemin's eyes was his younger brother skillfully greeting customers, as if Junhee had been doing this job for a long time. Of course, Jaemin had no idea that the person standing before him was Bong San, a man with a face identical to Junhee's. Now, Jaemin desperately wanted to hear his younger brother's explanation for secretly opening a shop here. Bong San lied, saying he wanted to explore the market and learn about business. But this time, Jaemin wouldn't let Bong San off so easily. He had previously heard his brother say he had no interest in business, yet now he was secretly opening a shop. Therefore, Jaemin became even more determined to compete for the inheritance with his brother. Trouble began to mount when Seon encountered Yujin at Bong San's shop. Both were surprised by each other's appearance. Bong San, in each of his identities, had connections to them, but the other remained unaware. Just as Bong San returned, he immediately found himself in an awkward situation. Before Seon could reveal that Bong San was the heir to the Sophia Group, he quickly covered her mouth and pulled her away. At this time, the Sophia Group was planning to demolish Dongdaemun Market to build a shopping mall. Jaemin was in charge of this project, so he wanted to speed things up. He began having his subordinates gradually buy up all the shops in the market. Since Yujin also worked there, Jaemin wanted her to quit and become his designer. But Yujin resolutely refused, even hoping that Jaemin would stop pursuing her. Seeing Yujin leave so decisively, Jaemin was extremely annoyed. He immediately stood up and chased after her to try and stop her. Seon, who was nearby, accidentally discovered their relationship. Seon then thought Yujin was a philanderer, simultaneously flirting with both the older and younger brothers of the same family. When Jaemin heard Seon say that, he didn't understand what she meant. Seon then revealed that Yujin was working at Bong San's shop and that they were very close. Hearing this, Jaemin's anger flared up again, but he still had to go there to confirm it. And sure enough, Jaemin saw the scene exactly as Seon had described. His jealousy only fueled his determination to defeat his younger brother. Meanwhile, Jaemin's manager came to see Ji-san to ask him to help buy up the stalls at Dongdaemun Market. The manager specifically instructed Ji-san to keep an eye on the shop called Little Master. Hearing this, Ji-san curiously asked what his friend had gotten himself into. Unexpectedly, the manager said it was the shop of the young master of the Sophia Group. Such an absurd situation was unbelievable to Ji-san. He wondered how Bong San, an orphan, could be the chairman's nephew. Junhee was also about to return to Korea. The housekeeper informed Bong San of this news. Bong San only needed to endure one more day, and everything would be over. The agreement between them would expire, and the shop would officially belong to Bong San. At this time, Yujin also sold her first dress design. The buyer was none other than the chairman disguised as a customer. The chairman saw the potential in Yujin's products, and even placed a large order. Both Bong San and Yujin were lucky that day, so they celebrated that evening. Bong San asked Yujin to come see him the next night, because he had a surprise for her. The next day, Bong San brought back what he had borrowed from Junhee's house. It seemed Bong San could finally return to being himself. Suddenly, the butler appeared, looking terrified. The butler led Bong San to see Junhee. Instead of returning to his healthy state, Junhee was now weakly confined to a wheelchair. Although the surgery was successful, his body hadn't accepted the new heart, and his health was deteriorating. Junhee wasn't sure how much longer he could live. It had been hoped that after the surgery, Junhee would return to a healthy body and start a new life. But unexpectedly, his life had become even more hopeless. Not only was the butler heartbroken, but Bong San couldn't control her emotions either. Bong San wanted to know Junhee's last wish. No matter how difficult it was, Bong San would try her best to fulfill it. Junhee didn't have any grand requests. He simply took out a photograph of a woman and asked Bongsan if he knew her. Although his memories were hazy, Bongsan could still recognize the woman. She often appeared in his dreams, and she was the woman he used to call mother. At that moment, Junhee burst into tears, saying that she was their mother, that they were both her children. Junhee only managed to say those words before passing away, right before Bongsan's eyes. Bongsan hadn't even had a chance to reunite with his family before Junhee left this world forever. The funeral was then held secretly because Junhee wanted Bongsan to replace him as the young master of the Sophia Group. But if he followed his brother's wishes, Bongsan would never be able to return to his true identity. For the rest of his life, Bongsan would only be able to live under someone else's identity. The butler earnestly begged Bongsan to agree to Junhee's last request, but in the end, Bongsan couldn't do it, and he even missed his date with Yujin. When Bongsan returned to the shop, he heard that Yujin had moved back to her old house. Furthermore, Jaemin had bought that house for Yujin. Bongsan was still in shock that so much had changed in just one day. He ran to find Yujin to ask for clarification, but at that moment, he saw Jaemin hugging Yujin tightly. Jaemin begged Yujin to stay with him because he was so lonely. Although Yujin resisted a little, in the end, she couldn't give up on Jaemin. Witnessing this, Bongsan almost lost all hope. Once, Bongsan had asked Yujin if she had been moved by Jaemin's generosity. At that time, Yujin refused to answer, which only strengthened Bongsan's suspicions. If Yujin was materialistic, then Bongsan would have abandoned his impoverished status to become the young master of a leading Korean conglomerate. When Yujin arrived at the hotel, she was surprised to find Jaemin there. Even more unbelievable was that Bongsan appeared in a completely different guise. Bongsan introduced himself as Junhee, the young master of the Sophia Group. Yujin was confused, not understanding what Bongsan was saying. Bongsan, however, confidently introduced himself as Jaemin's younger brother. Yujin thought she had misheard, but seeing Jaemin's expression, she confirmed it. Wanting confirmation, Yujin went back to ask acquaintances at the market. But aside from the fact that Bongsan was an orphan, no one had any other information about him. Yujin wanted Bongsan to confirm it himself. And just like before, Bongsan said he was the young master of the Sophia Group. Bongsan hadn't told Yujin about it for his own reasons. Now, Bongsan only wants to reveal his true identity to pursue Yujin fairly, because otherwise, he won't be able to compete with Jaemin. But now, Yujin only feels hurt by Bongsan's deception. They shared so many beautiful memories thanks to their equal backgrounds, yet now Bongsan seems like someone far beyond her reach. The chairman is currently showing Mr. Choi Yujin's design. From the choice of fabric to every detail of the dress, Mr. Choi praised it profusely. Both acknowledge Yujin as a rare talent, so the chairman wants Mr. Choi to meet with Yujin. At the same time, the company will soon launch a sportswear collection. This is a rather important project, so the chairman has decided to entrust it to his nephew, Junhee. However, Bongsan lacked experience in this area, so he wanted to find a designer to assist him. The person he thought of was Saein. Professionally, Saein had the most experience. Meanwhile, Yujin had met Professor Choi. Only now did Yujin realize that the old woman she had met the other day was actually the chairman. This was a great opportunity for Yujin. The chairman wanted to invite Yujin to work as a designer for her company, but first, she wanted to test Yujin's abilities. Therefore, the chairman wanted to send Yujin to help with Bongsan's project. Bongsan and Saein were still wondering who Jaemin would bring with him later. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Bongsan excitedly went to open the door. Bongsan was surprised to see Yujin with Jaemin. Bongsan wondered if Jaemin had intentionally done this to him, but Jaemin immediately said that it was his grandmother's order. Since it was a work matter, they didn't want to argue. Everyone started discussing to come up with ideas. Bongsan and Yujin worked very well together, which made both Saein and Yujin jealous. Saein thought that if the two continued to be so close, she feared that both she and Jaemin would have difficulty keeping their loved ones. Then Jaemin reminded Yujin that Bongsan was now the heir to the Sophia Group. He was no longer the boy who sold clothes with Yujin on the street every day. Therefore, Yujin needed to understand the difference in their status so that she wouldn't harbor too many illusions. Moreover, the madam had also known about the complicated relationship between the four of them. She didn't want Jaemin to continue associating with Yujin anymore. Meanwhile, Jaemin had to find a way to marry Saein to take over the corporation. But this time, Jaemin defied his mother's wishes to choose the woman he loved. Jaemin wanted both Yujin to seize the corporation from his younger brother. Bongsan had repeatedly visited Yujin's house to try and win her back. He abandoned his past to become a wealthy young master, all because he wanted to love her in a way he deserved. However, Yujin still refused to forgive Bongsan for deceiving her. To her, Bongsan's concealment of his identity was a sign of disrespect. Meanwhile, the butler wanted to verify Bongsan's identity, so he sought out the woman who had delivered the young master's mother. She personally confirmed that the late madam had given birth to twins. That alone was enough to dispel all of the butler's doubts. Now he would treat Bong San as his master and willingly serve him unconditionally. The butler hoped Bong San could live out Junhee's unfinished life. The butler also showed Bong San the letter Junhee wrote before his death. In it, Junhee recounted how he had checked their blood types and verified that they were siblings. Now, the butler had only one request for Bong San to fulfill Junhee's last wish. Bong San still couldn't accept what was happening. He desperately wanted to know where his mother was and whether she was still alive. The butler said that after he took Bong San to the care center, their mother had passed away from heart disease, which had been inherited by Junhee. Knowing this heartbreaking story, Bong San could no longer remain indifferent. He decided to fulfill his brother's last wish. From that day on, Bong San no longer considered returning to his original identity. He officially joined the company and was assigned to the design department. Jae-min would be assisting Bong San, and he had prepared many company documents for Bong San to review. Yoo-jin then had the opportunity to meet the president directly. The president entrusted Yoo-jin with the responsibility of creating a new brand. Seeing the president's support for Yoo-jin, Jae-min was even happier for her, as the president had always been very demanding. Afterwards, the two went to see the showroom displaying the designs they had just launched. Coincidentally, they ran into Bong San and Seon there. The atmosphere immediately became awkward. Yoo-jin was still not used to Bong San's new image. She had asked many people in the market, but they only knew Bong San from the past 3 years. Jae-min found this very confusing. His younger brother had only recently returned to the country, so he couldn't have been selling at the market for 3 years. It was just a fleeting thought, so Jae-min didn't investigate further. Of course, Jae-min didn't know that the younger brother he saw every day was an imposter. Se-yoon was no different from Jae-min. Se-yoon had suggested that Bong San cooperate with her to exploit the Paris market, but Bong San had no expertise whatsoever, so he could only find reasons to refuse. The chairman was also very concerned about Bong San's studies, but according to reports, Bong San wasn't very serious about them. Therefore, the chairman assigned the two nephews the task of planning the acquisition of stalls in Dongdaemun market without conflict. Because Bong San already had connections, all the shop owners readily helped him, especially the woman Bong San was closest to in the market, who revealed many secrets to him. Before Bong San finished his work, Ji-san came and dragged him away. Ji-san said he didn't want to do this job anymore. He planned to open his own shop and asked Bong San to join him. He said that if Bong San sold all her shares and they ran away together, they would become rich. Bong San immediately objected. This was a crazy idea that only a thug could come up with. Because of their busy work schedules, Bong San and Yoo-jin rarely saw each other. Today, since it was on his way, Bong San stopped by the shop to see how Yoo-jin was doing. Upon arriving, Bong San found Yoo-jin distracted. Yoo-jin didn't even hear customers calling, causing them to leave in frustration. Bong San wanted to help Yoo-jin, but he didn't know what to say. Just as Bong San was about to leave silently, an acquaintance recognized him. Hearing the call, Yoo-jin also noticed. So the two went to the place where they had once shared their dreams, but now their social standing is so different that they can no longer talk as freely as before. Yoo-jin, though heartbroken, has to say cold words to make Bong San give up hope. Bong San, on the other hand, is even more determined to develop Dongdaemun market. Upon returning home, Bong San rushes to complete the market development plan that her grandmother entrusted to her. Meanwhile, Jae-min, wanting support from Seon's family, convinces her to cooperate with him on this project. In return, Seon wants Jae-min to send Yoo-jin abroad to study. Seon just wants Yoo-jin to leave her Bong San as quickly as possible. Just as Seon goes out, she unexpectedly runs into Ji-san. Ji-san tries to flirt with Seon, but she flatly rejects him. Unexpectedly, Ji-san didn't stop. Instead, he tightened his grip on Seon's hand. Luckily, Jae-min appeared in time and rescued Seon. Ji-san, however, was chased by security guards. While fleeing, Ji-san dropped many documents related to Bong San. Jae-min became suspicious of this person named Bong San. Clearly, the shop was registered under Bong San's name instead of Junhee's. Therefore, Jae-min assigned his subordinates to investigate the matter. Now, it was time for Bong San and Jae-min to present their plan to the chairman. This would be a crucial moment to decide who would become the heir, but the investigation results were already in. Bong San and Junhee were two completely different people. Someone like Bong San, who had been taken to an orphanage since birth, couldn't possibly be Jae-min's younger brother. To be even more certain, Jae-min sought out Ji-san to verify the information. On the day of the chairman's birthday celebration, everyone happily enjoyed the lively atmosphere. At the same time, Bong San's plan was approved by the chairman. Jae-min chose that moment to expose the imposter's true face. Jaemin showed everyone Bong San's resume to prove his point. Bong San and the butler immediately became extremely tense. At that moment, Jaemin lifted Bong San's shirt to check. If Bong San didn't have the heart surgery scar, it could be confirmed that this was an imposter. But Bong San did have that scar on his chest. Yujin immediately looked confused. The grandmother immediately called the two into a private room to scold them. At the same time, the grandmother also wanted to know why Jaemin insisted that his younger brother was being impersonated. In fact, even Jaemin was very flustered at this moment. Just as Jaemin didn't know how to explain, the butler spoke up. The butler told the chairman that Junhee had opened a shop in Dongdaemun Market, but the young master was using the alias Bong San. This led to a misunderstanding with Jaemin. The chairman was convinced by this explanation and didn't question further. For the chairman, the matter ended there. But for Jaemin, it was different. He was certain the person standing before him was an imposter. So Jaemin asked Ji-san to help him investigate further. Initially, Ji-san hesitated, fearing it would affect her friend. But Jaemin assured her that he wouldn't harm Bong San because the person he wanted to find was Junhee. Hearing this, Ji-san agreed to help. At this time, the Sophia Corporation began posting notices for a talent search competition for designers. The winner would have the opportunity to study in Paris. Of course, Jaemin wanted Yujin to participate, so he tried to persuade her. The madam also met Yujin for the first time at Mr. Choi's place. Yujin was the woman her son often mentioned, so she wanted to find out about Yujin's family background, but the results only disappointed her. Yujin's family was bankrupt and heavily in debt. When Yujin returned to the market, she heard that a gang of thugs had recently bought up many shops in the area, even seizing assets to force people to sell their businesses. Yujin knew the gang leader was a friend of Bong San, so she asked Bong San to intervene so that the people could still make a living. Therefore, Bong San went directly to find Ji-san. Bong San had no idea that Ji-san was working for his brother. Ji-san and his henchmen seized the opportunity to lift Bong San's shirt to examine the scar. Ji-san even asked Bong San where the scar came from. Bong San, without suspicion, said that the scar was from being beaten up in high school. After discussing it with her mother, Yujin decided to participate in the design competition. Yujin needs to find a way to improve her family's finances and pay off Jaemin's debts. At the same time, Yujin won't need to see Bong San as often anymore. However, Jaemin has secretly ordered his subordinates to buy up the shops under Junhee's name. He also spreads rumors that foreign brands are entering Dongdaemun, thus jeopardizing Bong San's plan to create her own brand. The madam wants to sow discord between Seon and Bong San, so she deliberately reveals to Seon that Bong San is the illegitimate child of the late chairman. She thinks that knowing this will deter Seon from supporting Bong San. Unexpectedly, this only makes Seon love and cherish Bong San even more. When Seon recounts this to Bong San, he is deeply moved. Seon also registers for a design competition. Bong San wants to help Seon find fabric for her clothes, but they visit many stalls without finding a suitable fabric, so they search through piles of old clothes to sort through the fabric. By then, Ji-san's investigation had yielded results. Junhee had returned to the country a long time ago, but didn't enter through Seoul. Instead, he entered Jeju Island. Furthermore, Junhee wasn't using his own name, but Bong San's. Jaemin even called the hospital where Junhee had been treated to inquire about his brother's condition. From there, Jaemin heard the shocking news that his brother had passed away long ago. Yet, both the housekeeper and Bong San had concealed this. This made Jaemin extremely angry. Meanwhile, Yujin's mother also asked Bong San to stop seeing her daughter. Although she knew the two had feelings for each other, their family backgrounds were too different. The mother feared her daughter would suffer, so she hoped Bong San would be the one to proactively give up on Yujin. Since Yujin's mother had already said so, Bong San couldn't go against her wishes. Bong San returned to the shop that he had entrusted Yujin and her mother with, looking after for some time. But this time, Bong San didn't come to work. He came to tell Yujin that he would close the shop permanently and never return. He also wanted to erase all memories of Yujin. To prevent Jaemin from further suspicion, Bong San asked the housekeeper to use his name on Junhee's death certificate. But Bong San didn't know that his secret had already been revealed long ago. At this point, Yujin knew that her mother had asked Bong San to avoid her. However, she couldn't control her feelings for him anymore. Whether he was Junhee or Bong San didn't matter. She only wanted to be by his side. But just as she was about to meet him, she ran into Seon. Taking advantage of the situation, Seon revealed that both families were preparing for her and Bong San's engagement, so she hoped that Yujin would no longer bother her future husband. Bong San now only wanted to obediently follow his grandmother's arrangements. Only when Bong San agreed to marry the daughter of the chairman of the credit corporation would the chairman feel secure in handing over the company to him. Moreover, However, his relationship with Seon was very good. If he got engaged to Seon, Bong-san promised to take good care of her. Jaemin knew that Yoo-jin and Bong-san were completely over, so he humbled himself and begged Yoo-jin to accept his feelings once more. But no matter what, Yoo-jin couldn't be with someone she didn't love. Jaemin had been rejected by Yoo-jin so many times because of Bong-san, so Jaemin hated Bong-san even more. Jaemin was determined to make Bong-san lose everything. The fashion design competition had reached the semi-finals, and the judges were about to give a challenge. Contestants would draw lots to find their partners to overcome this challenge. Yoo-jin drew the number 5. While searching for someone with the same number, she saw Seon. They once again had a chance to work together, seizing this opportunity to clear up misunderstandings from their time studying in Paris. Suddenly, an angry man stormed into the company looking for Bong-san, demanding compensation for allegedly selling him substandard goods. Jaemin immediately reported this to the chairman. Jaemin also stated that Bong-san had used his status as the heir to the corporation to conduct business with the other party, damaging the company's reputation. At the same time, people in the market knew that Bong-san was buying up their shops, and even hired thugs to pressure them. Now the people at the market are furious. However, in reality, Jaemin orchestrated all of this. Bong-san received a call from his grandmother and rushed home. Before Bong-san could even understand what had happened, his grandmother angrily threw his resume onto the table. She questioned who had used Bong-san's name to fly to Paris for surgery while he was pretending to be a vendor at the market. The butler, realizing the secret could no longer be concealed, knelt down and confessed everything to the chairman. The butler said that Bong-san was actually just someone hired by young master Jun-hee to impersonate him, and that Jun-hee had gone to Paris for surgery. If that were the case, his grandmother wanted to see Jun-hee even more because she heard that her grandson had returned to the country a long time ago. The grandmother was very puzzled as to why her grandson hadn't come to see her yet. The housekeeper didn't dare tell the truth. Jaemin then took the housekeeper's place and revealed the truth. Jun-hee had passed away. Upon hearing this news, the grandmother was so shocked that she collapsed. Everyone rushed her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Although she was out of danger, she still needed further monitoring at the hospital. Therefore, Jaemin would take over all company matters. Jaemin wanted Bong-san to go to prison to pay for his fraud, but the housekeeper begged Jaemin to spare Bong-san because Bong-san was Jun-hee's twin brother and the chairman's nephew. Jaemin knew this but pretended not to know anything. Afterwards, Jaemin secretly ordered his subordinates to shift all the blame onto Bong-san, especially when the people at Dongdaemun Market wanted to sue. Hearing that the chairman had been hospitalized, Seon met with Jaemin to inquire about the situation. Unexpectedly, Seon heard directly from Jaemin that the Jun-hee she knew was just an imposter, an uneducated market vendor hired to impersonate him. At this moment, Seon remembered Bong-san saying he wasn't Jun-hee, and she had thought he was just saying that to reject her feelings. Although she knew he had deceived her, she still wanted to find him to clarify things. But when she arrived at the store, Seon only met Yoo-jin. Finally, Seon asked Yoo-jin to pass on a message to Bong-san if she happened to see him. After saying this, Seon left. Yoo-jin was bewildered, not understanding what had happened. Now she couldn't even reach Bong-san. Yoo-jin became even more confused, so she went to see Jaemin to find out why. From there, Yoo-jin knew the entire plan of Bong-san's impersonation. Although shocked by what she had just heard, Yoo-jin still believed that the Bong-san she knew wasn't the kind of person who would deceive for money. Therefore, Yoo-jin tried returning to Bong-san's old house to see if he was there. Sure enough, she found Bong-san. Yoo-jin saw Bong-san in an extremely distressed and exhausted state. This made Yoo-jin even more eager to know why Bong-san had impersonated someone else. Bong-san had even bought up shops in the market. Despite being wrongly accused, Bong-san couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth about his relationship with Jun-hee, so he only said that initially he wanted to experience a life of luxury for fun, but then he became greedy. Bong-san didn't want to be a poor man in the market anymore. He wanted fame and fortune. He thought that with just a word, he could donate to many orphanages. He believed that by becoming Jun-hee, he could easily obtain everything. At this point, Yoo-jin interrupted and questioned Bong-san, asking if he had taken someone else's life because of it. Bong-san didn't know how to answer. This only deepened Yoo-jin's misunderstanding of Bong-san. Therefore, Yoo-jin decided to cut off all contact with Bong-san. Yoo-jin swore that she would never see Bong-san again. The next day, Seon also came to the place. Looking at the dilapidated house before her, Seon couldn't believe that someone she once knew lived there. But seeing Bong-san walk out the door, Seon no longer had any doubts. Seon angrily questioned Bong-san, asking if he had intended to take advantage of her from the beginning. Bong-san tried to explain that he was only afraid of his identity being revealed, and that he had never had any malicious intentions towards her. But San believed it was all lies, so she ended the relationship with him. him. The only two women in Bongsan's life have now left him. Now Bongsan's only friend is the thug Ji-san. Ji-san never expected Jaemin to go this far. Although Jaemin initially promised not to harm Bongsan, now, even Bongsan's desire to visit his grandmother is constantly thwarted by Jaemin. Jaemin refuses to acknowledge Bongsan as his grandmother's biological grandson. If both Junhee and Bongsan are eliminated, no one will compete with Jaemin for the inheritance. However, the butler still stands by Bongsan's side. The butler secretly created opportunities for Bongsan to visit his grandmother and is determined to help him reclaim what rightfully belongs to him. But given Bongsan's current depressed state, it's highly unlikely. Therefore, the butler revealed the whole truth to Yujin. The housekeeper said that Bongsan initially agreed to impersonate Junhee only to help Yujin reclaim the store. Later, Bongsan only wanted to fulfill his deceased brother's dying wish. Bongsan wasn't as greedy as he had claimed. At this point, Yujin realized she had misunderstood a kind-hearted person like Bongsan. Therefore, Yujin was filled with remorse. Yujin wanted to quickly meet Bongsan to apologize, but when she arrived at his house, he wasn't there. Meanwhile, Jaemin, taking advantage of the chairman's coma, conspired with his mother to seize control of the company. They consulted a lawyer to find out who had authorized Junhee to hold the shares. However, Junhee donated all of his assets to charity, except for some real estate which he left to someone outside the family. Meanwhile, Bongsan returned to the market and was surrounded by people cursing and even beating him. Yet, Bongsan remained silent, enduring their insults and attacks. Then, Yujin discovered Bongsan there and bravely rushed out to protect him. At the same time, she explained to everyone that Bongsan had been falsely accused. But they not only didn't believe her, they also thought the two were accomplices. Seeing these people touching Yujin, Bongsan couldn't tolerate it anymore. He yelled at them and took her away. Only now did the two have the opportunity to resolve their misunderstandings. Meanwhile, Swan still couldn't forget Bongsan, so she returned to his dilapidated house. As Swan was about to knock on the door, she heard laughter on the rooftop. Curious, she went upstairs and saw Bongsan and Yujin playing together. This proved they had gotten back together. Seon was furious, thinking that Bongsan had only recently broken off his engagement, yet he was already with another woman. Seon wanted to know if he had ever loved her, but Bongsan's answer deeply disappointed her. Seon vowed she wouldn't let him live in peace. Not only did Seon not want to bless their relationship, but Yujin's mother also strongly opposed it. In her eyes, Bongsan was nothing more than a shameless deceiver. If Yujin still wanted to be with Bongsan, she would threaten her daughter with her own life. The plan to create a unique brand for Dongdaemun had been cancelled by Jaemin. Instead, his plan was to build an outlet mall. Bongsan was furious when she heard that Ji-san was working for Jaemin. It was clear that Jaemin had taken advantage of his position running the company while his grandmother was in a coma to benefit himself. Furthermore, Jaemin had overheard a conversation between his mother and the housekeeper. It turned out that the woman Junhee's mother met before she died was Jaemin's mother. At that time, due to the shock, Junhee's mother had a heart attack, but Jaemin's mother coldly ignored her without calling an ambulance, resulting in Junhee's mother's death. Meanwhile, the fabric Yujin needed was suddenly bought up entirely by some company. Even if Yujin searched all over Korea, she couldn't find the fabric she needed. This competition was very important to Yujin, so she went to see Mrs. Lee, who had all kinds of fabric. However, Mrs. Lee couldn't sell the fabric to Yujin just because they knew each other. The person who secretly bought up all the fabric was Seon. Seon wanted to use this to force Bongsan back to her. Now, whether he was Junhee or Bongsan, Seon didn't care anymore. As long as he agreed to marry Seon, she could give him all the power that Junhee once had. And Yujin would also become a famous designer with Jaemin's help. If the two of them stubbornly stayed together, they would only face more trouble. Faced with this threat, Bongsan still decided to choose the woman he loved. He would rather overcome difficulties with Yujin than abandon her for another woman. As soon as he returned, Bongsan used all his connections to ask if there were any alternative fabrics, but the results still disappointed Bongsan. Bongsan had no other choice but to humble himself and beg Seon to return the fabric to Yujin. But now, no matter what Bongsan said, it was useless. Moreover, Yujin already knew that Seon was behind the plot to harm her, so she wouldn't let Bongsan beg Seon anymore. Yujin herself would create a different design with Bongsan. Seon no longer needed the fabric that had been bought. On the day of the competition, competition, Bong-san asked Ji-sun to take Yoo-jin to the competition. Bong-san received news that his grandmother had just woken up, so he had to rush to the hospital. The butler told the chairman that she still had a long-lost grandson, a twin brother of Jun-hee. That person was none other than Bong-san. That's why the two looked so alike. Meanwhile, the competition was drawing to a close. The judges announced that the final winner was Yoo-jin. Once again, Se-in lost to Yoo-jin, leaving her utterly humiliated. Yoo-jin received applause from everyone because she fully deserved the result. After winning, Yoo-jin was sent to France for 2 years of study, with all expenses covered by the company. Upon her return, Yoo-jin had to become the exclusive designer for Sophia. Hearing Jae-min say this, Yoo-jin was suddenly stunned. Initially, the goal of the competition was to find a brand designer for Dongdaemun. Now, Jae-min suddenly cancelled it to serve other purposes of the company, which Yoo-jin refused to accept. This was tantamount to Yoo-jin betraying the trust of the people in the market and her father. In the end, Yoo-jin returned the prize, because creating a unique brand for Dongdaemun was her father's unfulfilled wish. Hearing this, Jae-min suddenly remembered something. A man had previously opposed Jae-min's purchase of the shops in Dongdaemun market. He was eventually driven to bankruptcy. It turned out that the person was Yoo-jin's father. While the chairman hadn't fully recovered, Jae-min organized a shareholders meeting to remove his grandmother from her position. Although Bong-san was authorized by his grandmother to participate, the percentage of votes supporting Bong-san was still lower than his brother's. Just when Jae-min thought his plan was about to succeed, Yoo-jin unexpectedly appeared. Yoo-jin was there on behalf of the housekeeper. It turned out that the housekeeper had been secretly buying shares to support Bong-san. That 3% was enough to reverse the situation. The percentage of people opposing the removal of the chairman increased, so his grandmother remained in charge of the company. Jae-min never expected to find himself in this situation. Although shocked, he didn't dare blame Yoo-jin, because he was the one who had caused Yoo-jin's family to go bankrupt and fall into debt. Once Jae-min agreed to reveal this secret, he was prepared for her to hate him for life. But Yoo-jin still chose to forgive Jae-min. Grandma didn't blame Jae-min at all. She even held her grandson's hand tightly and apologized to him for making him think she only loved Jun-hee. This had caused Jae-min to act out of jealousy towards his younger brother. Afterwards, the whole family visited Jun-hee's grave. Now they are very harmonious and no longer inherit. Bong-san will also not return to work in Sophia. Instead, he will build his own career. He decided to study abroad. And after a year, Bong-san kept his promise to return to Yoo-jin's side. Bong-san announced that he had collaborated with many clients in France and that he and Yoo-jin would create a new brand called Itaidol, which was also the name of Yoo-jin's father's former store. Now they will fulfill his unfinished dream. The drama ends here. Thank you for your interest and for watching. Goodbye and see you again.